Welcome to Macro Hive Conversations with Bilal Hafiz. We aim to bring you the best macro analysis to help you successfully invest in financial markets. For our latest analysis, visit macrohive.com. The US yield curve recently inverted, so all the talk is about a US recession. Earlier this year, we rolled out our own US recession prediction model based on the US yield curve, which you can track on the Macro Hive website. It recently began assigning a 50% chance of a US recession, and so it's well worth keeping an eye on the tracker in the coming few weeks. As for how to invest around US recessions, we published a note which looked at how markets behaved around past recessions. It's a useful guide to navigating markets. We also published a series of notes around Europe's energy problem. It's worse than you think. And finally, we gave some projections on where Bitcoin prices could go in the coming few years. You'll have to read the note to find out what they are. To get access to all of these insights, simply become a member at macrohive.com. With membership, you can get access to all of our updates, webinars, transcripts, and our member Slack room, where you can interact with the Macro Hive research team and other members all hours of the day. Membership to Macro Hive costs the same as a few weekly cappuccinos, so go to macrohive.com to sign up now. And if you're a professional or institutional investor, we have a more high-octane product that features all of my and the Macro Hive research team's views, our model portfolio, trade ideas, machine learning models, and much, much more. Hit me up on Bloomberg or email me on bilal@macrohive.com to find out more. Now, on to this episode's guest, Denise Shull. Denise is the founder and CEO of ReThink. In that role, she uses neuroscience and modern psychoanalysis to help clients become successful in investing, trading, and leading teams. She's also consulted on the development of Showtime's Billions show, coached Olympic champions, and often appears on CNBC, Bloomberg, and in the Wall Street Journal. Before ReThink, Denise worked in finance. She started at one of the first electronic trading firms in Chicago, then traded at Schonfeld Securities, before running her own desk at Sharpe Capital. Denise holds a master's from the University of Chicago, and her thesis was cited in 2013 as one of the first papers written about neuropsychoanalysis. She's also a 2009 alumni of Harvard's Kennedy School Executive Education Program, Investment Decisions and Behavioral Finance. Now on to our conversation. So greetings and welcome, Denise. I've been really looking forward to our conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Well, the first thing I like to do with all of my guests is to learn a bit more about the guests. So I like to learn your origin story. I imagine you have quite an interesting one. And was it inevitable that you'll kind of end up where you are today? So it'd be good to know what you studied at university and then what your first job was and what was your path to where you are now.
Well, would you believe I majored in biology and nutrition?
Okay.
But it's actually germane because it was sort of about like, how are we who we are? Yeah. Like that's the common thread. But then I went to work for IBM because like having a corporate job where you sold computers and they paid you, in these big commission checks, it seemed kind of cool. And so I started doing that. I literally thought I would do that. And I was supposed to go to Stanford and get my MBA. And I was 27. And I thought, oh my God, if I wake up when I'm 40 and I have to sell somebody a computer, I'm literally going to slit my wrist. Who cares? And so I'd actually gotten myself into therapy because I thought it sounded interesting. And I thought, that'd be interesting to be a psychologist. So I finagled my life. I quit IBM. I went to Aspen for the winter, finagled my life into Chicago and got into this graduate program at the University of Chicago. It's like a design your own, do whatever you want. Oh. And so I did, following on the biology, what was called biopsychology. In other words, how does our brain create our perception? How does our brain create our self-image? Where does it come from? How do we have a personality that's consistent? It has to be neurochemicals somehow. At least that's what I said. People thought I was crazy. Anyway, I had been dating a former floor trader from the SIBO, the options exchange. And he had told me that he thought I would be a good trader and that I should buy a seat on the Chicago Board of Trade. They had this weather futures seat. And I was like, what on earth are you talking about? Weather futures seat and wave my hands in colored jackets? I don't think I'm doing that. But then as I was writing my master's thesis, he got invited to go upstairs in one of the first upstairs trading firms And so somehow I got swept along with that and ditched the PhD and became a trader and traded in prop firms and moved to New York to run my own desk. And yeah, and then all the biopsychology, which by that time was neuropsychoanalysis, started to come back into the psychology of trading and investing.
So presumably while you were trading, it became apparent to you that understanding psychology was important, or how that was influencing you. I mean, because you took a detour into trading, so you could have just stayed in trading and, you know, just worked at a fund and carried on happily in trading, you know, for the rest of your career.
I mean, there's two things. If I'd known there was such a thing as a hedge fund, which I didn't know, but had I known, I think I would have set out to start my own, but I literally didn't know. I did sit next to Dimitri Balyazny, who obviously clearly came to know, and whether he knew at that time or not, I don't know. But yeah, it was all like, what's your process, right? What's your trading plan? Like, create your process, create your trading plan, follow your process, follow your plan. So I was being told that it was supposed to be this linear, systematic thing. Except I would notice that the people who were making the most money weren't necessarily doing the linear, systematic thing.
Okay.
You know, and I was reading all the books that there were to read, Market Wizards and, you know, Mark Douglas's books and Ari Keebe's books. And I was even hiring them. I hired Keebe a little bit. I hired Douglas a little bit. But I had the view that everyone else has, that it's like thinking and then following your process. So it's thinking and behavior, and feelings and emotions are supposed to have nothing to do with it. And then I discovered, when someone wanted to publish my master's thesis, it's like as a complete fluke out of, left field. And I said, look, it's got to be updated. It's neuroscience and it's a decade old. And so when I updated it, there was starting to be research showing that we can't make any decision without emotion. And I was like, wait, what? Like, if we can't make any decision without emotion, meaning if we didn't have emotion, we couldn't make a decision, which is what the original science showed. People who were devoid of emotion couldn't decide what day to make a doctor appointment on. They couldn't decide what shirt to wear in the morning. I was like, this changes everything. Like, and I literally was just talking to someone about it. And then they asked me to write an article. It was the craziest thing. And then I wrote the article, and which I had wanted to be a journalist at one point, and my mother talked me out of it. So I thought like writing an article in a magazine would be like really cool. And that would be that. That would be that.
Yeah.
And then someone asked me to come talk about it. And then someone else. And here we are basically 20 years later. When you want me to talk about it? It like took on a life of its own.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it clearly shows that this was a part of your journey. I mean, you were thinking a lot about, well, let's get meta. You're thinking about thinking, along the way. Yes. I mean, not everybody thinks in those ways. I mean, some people would have just said, okay, I'm going to stick to the process and I'm not going to stick my head up and look around and see what other people are doing. So there was something within you to look kind of a step above.
I know this sounds something, but like, I honestly now think I was meant to do this in this position, and literally like my whole entire life has brought me into this position, that I was interested in perception and judgment, that I was interested in emotion, that I was interested in the human unconscious, like, why do we really do what we do? And then I became this trader and had this experience in the markets, and then the two came back together. Because all of those things, perception and judgment, emotion, confidence, conviction, we can just start with those emotions. And the fact that a lot of it's unconscious, all are like absolutely germane to success in the market.
Yeah.
And so I just happen to have these strands of things.
And your master's thesis was the neurobiology of Freud's repetition compulsion.
Yeah, that's it. I read that.
What was Freud's repetition compulsion? What does that mean?
There's this great paragraph that I'm not going to be able to quote exactly, but it's something like, all of a man's relationships, no matter how differently they start, end the same way. All of a man's situations, no matter how positive they look at the beginning, have the same conclusion. And he basically identified that people have this tendency, which he believed was a compulsion, to get themselves in repetitive circumstance. Okay. And I noticed me and my friends doing that in our dating relationships.
Yeah.
Like, and I was like, I think there's something to this. So I wanted to know, like, there has to be if we do that, there has to be a template of some sort, right? Like, we have to be unconsciously reacting according to sort of some pre-programmed thing. Because how else could it happen? Yeah. I mean, this was my thought in 1995 at the University of Chicago. And so I'm like, well, what is it? Like, how could that be? Like, what would happen in the human brain that would allow us to, you know, date two completely different guys with completely different personalities and basically have the relationship take the same course and end in the same way? Like, yeah, first of all, the individual's doing something to make that happen, right?
Yeah.
But how could they be doing it in a way that's repetitive? That's what I wanted to know. That's literally what that master's thesis was about.
Yeah. But it rings true. I mean, it sounds like that's a story of our lives in some ways, where we're in this constant repetitive, psychodrama with whatever, our relationships. It could be with our work. It could be with ourselves. And in some ways, when you interact with another person or some institutional entity, in some ways, it's simply a mirror onto yourself. It's really just telling you about yourself rather than the other.
Yeah. I mean, as it turns out, we develop like our view of who we are in the world and like where we fit and what we should expect to get when we're really little.
Yeah. And
we develop that core self-image, right? By how we're treated by the people around us when we're really little, like 1, 2, 3, 4. It also turns out there's a well-known phenomenon in biology called critical period.
Okay.
And so like critical period is easiest to understand in birds. If a bird does not hear its song during like a certain few weeks of development, the bird can never sing its song. That's critical period. Well, I surmised in my master's thesis that there really is a critical period essentially for self-image. And then if that's true, then like you expect an authority figure or you expect an intimate partner to treat you in a different way in accordance to whatever your self-image is.
Yeah.
And so then you behave in ways that get you what you created, right? Like, you know how like if someone's insecure and expects to be rejected and you can feel it, you oftentimes sort of reject them, like, because it's annoying. Like they recreate whereas if they expect you to, if someone expects you to treat them with respect and they're self-confident and they're not overly worried about your perception, then you treat them that way.
Yeah. That definitely feels true to my experience of myself and others. I mean, that really feels true. And
I mean, now what we have now, and we're jumping way ahead, that we didn't have that, is all kinds of neuroscience showing that everything about human perception and judgment is prediction, and it's prediction based on past experience. So like right now, you don't know it, but if we watched your brain in real time, we could show that you're using the parts of brain associated with your knowledge of language, and you're actually anticipating the next word that's going to come out of my mouth based on your knowledge of the subject, your knowledge of English language, and really, most importantly, you're predicting how it's going to make you feel.
Yeah.
So Freud, noticing what people were doing, is now we actually have the neuroscience to show like how the perception and judgment, this always predicting based on past experience, is not something that was known when I wrote my original master's thesis.
Yeah.
But it's the mechanism.
And so you've mentioned perception and judgment a few times. Why do you focus on those?
Because I think that's everything.
Yeah.
Like the human experience is like we're perceiving the world around us.
Yeah.
We should be perceiving ourselves, but let's just go with like how people experience life day to day. You're perceiving the world around you. You wake up, you feel groggy, you feel good, You feel hungover, you feel whatever you feel. Okay, that's a perception. Then you have a judgment. Oh, I'm going to work out or not work out. I'm going to eat breakfast. I'm going to drink coffee. Like life is a series of perceptions and judgment calls. It's all it is.
And is there a difference between judgment and decision and making a decision?
No, not really. Not in the sense that we're using them right now. Like a judgment call is a decision. Okay. You make an assessment and you decide you're going to behave. Behave's the third part. You perceive something, you make some assessment of it, some judgment, and then you make a decision about what you're going to do, and you do it. Yeah. We just keep cycling through those things.
And then the perception is linked to your unconscious then as well. So we think our perception is conscious and we're fully aware, but in reality, what you're saying is there's a layer beneath, which is the unconscious that is often driving that. And so two different people could observe the same scene and perceive it differently, or you yourself could perceive it differently depending time of day. It could be the same thing.
Time of day,
mood.
There's research, by the way, just since you made that so clear, you did such a good job of that. There was research done, I think it was at Columbia, and this has been like 15 years ago or so, where they set up this scenario that an interviewee was coming in, and all the details don't matter, but basically they were handed a hot cup of coffee or iced coffee. Like they had this thing where the intern dropped the books and they said, oh, can you hold my coffee? But anyway, the person being interviewed was handed either really hot coffee or really cold coffee. And then afterwards, they were asked to assess the interviewer. Okay. And there was a correlation between, was the interviewer warm and friendly and interesting to talk to in hot coffee, or was the interviewer rude and cold and hard to talk to in cold coffee? So the physical experience of hot or cold modified the person's perception somewhat slightly. Yeah. So what kind of mood you're in matters.
Yeah.
A long way of agreeing with that.
Yeah. And then the unconscious, how do you become conscious of your unconscious? How do you become aware of your unconscious?
You know what the gargantuan step one is be willing. Like just decide you want to know, because many of us have defense mechanisms against really knowing. And so if you're willing to it's self-awareness at the end of the day, right? If you're willing to be as self-aware as possible, and you want to be, you'll start to become more. Now, there's lots of things you can do and lots of help you can get. But for the general listener, I will just say that, be willing. Start there.
And why would somebody not be willing to look into?
There's things they don't want to see.
Okay.
There's things they don't want to see about themselves, or they don't want to see typically about the family they grew up in. It's usually not so much what they don't want to see in the here and now. I mean, there'll be a repetition in the here and now that is a repetition of something that happened to them.
Yeah.
But they don't want to see what happened to them. So we also, as children, when bad things happen, children are naturally narcissistic, right? And so one really effective coping mechanism for a child is to believe that something bad that happened is partly their fault. Now, why that's for the child, it gives the child a sense of control.
Okay.
Their parents are getting divorced, right? And they have nothing, they're sad and they're scared and they're hurt and they have no control over it, right? But if they say, well, they're getting divorced because I was bad, then they can think, well, if I'm good, maybe they'll get back together. Now it's a fantasy.
Yeah.
Right, of course, but it gives the child a sense of agency. So it's functional. We're supposed to lose that inaccurate self-blame as we become adults and actually have agency. Not all people do. And the self-criticism actually ironically functions as giving them a sense of control. So a hyper self-critical person, while it may sort of hurt them, let's say in a professional sense, where they're, being too hard on themselves, or too anxious or whatever. Ironically, it's giving them some sense of safety. Okay, but it's the kind of thing they're afraid to see, because the self-blame kept them safe originally. So that's just a good example of how we develop these mechanisms of coping that work. Yeah. And we're a little reluctant to lose them because we don't know what'll happen with that.
Yeah, and what's the benefit then of becoming aware of the unconscious?
Oh, you get to know who you really are, and you get to access all your capacity, or a lot more of your capacity. I mean, you get to sorry, it's an email thing just came across it. Like you're holding yourself back when you're functioning out of a defense mechanism that was artificially created to give you a sense of control. You really can't access all your intelligence and skills and abilities. You don't ever get to become what you're capable of becoming.
Yeah. And would it make your perceptions more accurate, or is there such thing as an accurate perception or not? Or is that like a false?
I think there are more and less accurate perceptions. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
So here's one that a lot of people relate to. People are generally a little bit self-conscious, right, and a little bit self-critical. But the truth is, everybody's a little bit self-conscious and a little bit self-critical.
Yeah.
So when one person thinks that the other person are thinking about them and criticizing, they're generally not. They're thinking about themselves.
Yeah.
And if everybody was realizing that everybody's thinking about themselves and not criticizing them, and how they said that, or what they wore, or whatever, like there'd sort of be less anxiety in the world.
Yeah.
Or less anxiety, just take one small social situation.
Yeah. No, it's interesting the way you're talking about the unconscious, because over the years I've done a lot of, self-reflection and work with therapists and so on. And, a few things that I've become aware of, one is that, there's 4 children in my family, 2 older sisters, then me and a brother. But my father used to always say, "You're my right-hand man," to me. And so I've always had this thing where I always want to be like the advisor, the right-hand man, the trusted other, the trusted lieutenant. And so through my career, I've always kind of, sort of consciously or not, I guess unconsciously, ended up assuming that role, kind of this like trusted advisory, right-hand man, the guy you can rely on the one hand. And then the other thing I've become aware of is that one of the ways I would get recognition from my parents was through getting good grades academically. And I find that in my job is to make market predictions. So, I think, okay, oil is going to go up or down, or stocks are going to go up or down. And if it goes up, I feel great. If it goes down, I feel really bad. It's almost like I'm getting a bad grade.
Yeah, totally.
And it's like this evaluation.
You are getting a bad grade.
Yeah, it kind of like goes back to my kind of self-esteem. At the same time, rationally, I know markets are at some level just completely random and arbitrary. So why do I think I can always get this thing right or not? And then you end up in these kind of paradoxes. But certainly, we're listening to you. These stories about myself come up, and I can quite easily relate to what you're saying.
And when it's all said and done, that's actually why you're talking to me, because as I started to talk about the human experience, the real human experience of perception and judgment in markets or careers, people started to relate to it, and people started to say, wait a minute, that makes sense to me, just like you just did. And I just, to tag this back to my back, I literally was just in this unusual confluence of circumstances where I was interested in this and didn't let anyone talk me out of it. That was probably. And so I kept pursuing what I seemed to be a more truthful explanation, essentially, of why we do what we do, why do humans do what they do. And why they do what they do in the market is like a particularly interesting problem. But why do we do what we do in general?
Yeah. And then, so if we bring it to markets, I mean, do you find that there's something about the market that makes people behave differently to other settings, or is it similar to other settings? It's just that there's a certain language we use in markets, there's a certain sort of domain kind of knowledge you have to relate to people? Or is there something about markets that makes things changes things a bit in terms of how you think about decision making?
Well, first of all, it's the hardest game on the planet. It's completely uncertain and it's completely ambiguous. It never ends. You can't make anything happen. So it's totally unlike sports. Any sports analogy doesn't apply. And ultimately, you're only predicting other people's perception.
Yeah.
People forget that, we have all these mathematical ways to do it, but your objective is to predict how other people are going to value oil next month or next year or whatever.
Yeah.
So people bring their own personality, their own social emotional makeup to this thing that is effectively a social emotional game disguised as some sort of probability game. And that you can use probabilities to play it, but it's not the answer.
No.
Just a clue to the mystery.
Yeah.
And that's what, I started talking about you have to have emotion to make a decision when I discovered it. What I didn't realize way back then, 2003, was that the Freudian repetition, the self-image expectation, was it going to play itself out vis-a-vis this Rorschach blot, ink blot of the market. And that people would trade, get bigger or smaller or in early or out early or doubt their judgment. Then that was just an application of their self-image. So they have their process and their lens, whatever that is, fundamental, global, macro, whatever it is. But it gets applied through their self-image.
Yeah.
With this implacable authority figure that is never going to pay attention to your personal emotional needs.
No.
But you're going to misinterpret its behavior and what you should do through these expectations about who you are and what you deserve and what the world will give you. These kind of fundamental self-image things. Now, there's a second layer to that you were very clear about just now, where you're literally re-experience the same experience you had. So, you're saying, my dad always said you were his right-hand man and you were expected to get good grades. So you provide research to people? That's like being their right-hand man, giving them the information, and getting the good grades is getting it right. You're literally doing what you were essentially groomed to do or shaped to do. I had a client last week who's the youngest of 4. His next older brother was 5 years older. And he's like, my biggest problem is I just way too often, I get overwhelmed with the fear of missing out. And so I either don't get out of my position when I should, or I get into it early because I just am literally overwhelmed with it. Well, when you're the younger brother of a brother 5 years older than you, your entire childhood experience is missing out.
Okay, yeah.
Right? You're 2, they're 7, you're 4, they're 9, you're 8, they're 13. Your entire childhood experiences, you can't keep up with them. You get into the market in your entire emotional experience, your repetition is the same as your past experience. I have thousands of examples of that, but that one was really clear.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. And what you said earlier about the ink blot of the market, or this figure, sort of judgment sort of figure, I've always had this kind of notion that the market is kind of there to make you humble, because every time you have this winning streak, whether you're a researcher or trader, whoever, invariably the market will come back to punish you and you'll lose that winning streak. It's just impossible to be this perfect prediction sort of machine. So there's this constant chipping away at your ego at some sort of level. It's kind of this interplay between the super ego and the ego, and or in theological terms, it's like God and man. and you're trying to become a god yourself, but then God reminds you that there's only one God, and you're going to be punished, and you're going to be, my smite will come upon you or something. So there's all of these things I've always felt when I've been engaged with markets.
It's definitely a tick by tick assault on your ego.
Yeah.
Or can be when it's not going well.
Yeah.
It's not, right? But it feels as if it is.
Yeah.
And
you've mentioned emotion a few times, the link between emotion, decision making, or emotion rationality. And as you said, the science is fairly clear on this, but it doesn't seem to make intuitive sense. It's almost like emotions get in the way of your rationality. It's almost like the ideal rational machine is someone who's extremely autistic, or who's like a robot who doesn't have any emotions. I mean, how do you kind of reconcile the link between emotion and rationality?
Well, I think the latest neuroscience says there is no separation, that the way to be most rational is to understand the actual data set of your feelings and emotions.
Okay.
Now, let me say a couple things. There is some research that showed that, I don't exactly remember if it was exactly on the spectrum, but it was a group of people who had, perception and judgment that was devoid of normal emotion.
Okay.
And they did have some success. So there is that. So there's that. I'm going to say a couple different things, and then we'll try to pull them back together. There's like a wild misunderstanding. It's not the emotion that causes the problem. It's the decision, right? It's the choice.
Yes.
So it's like really not control your emotions, it's control your choices. Like control your behavior. Like there's a literal illogical fallacy there. Which, by the way, when I first started trading, I couldn't understand it. The guy in the office who made the most money, who traded a risk arb strategy, which was, of course, to me as a brand new trader, damn complicated. He was also by far the most emotional, jumping up and down, screaming, this, that, and the other thing. Yet he printed money, like in this complicated strategy. And I was always like, take the emotion out of it, Steve. This doesn't add up. But in any event, so we think we make decisions based on our analysis.
Yeah.
We think we make decisions based on, how we've learned to understand the market. And then we do this analysis and we make this prediction. That's actually not what we make the decision on. We make the decision on our confidence in that analysis. And if we don't, for example, like if you are 3/4 of the way through an analysis and you think you know the answer, you probably, for the most part, don't stop, or you do a little bit more work. Because why? You want to develop more confidence in the thing you're saying. So your answer drops out of whatever your lens is about the market. And then you have a feeling about the viability of that answer.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's that feeling that caused you to do something. It's that feeling that it caused you to recommend. It's the lack of that feeling, or the opposite, let's say, and concern, doubt, anxiety, fear, panic, that might cause you to hold back and go get some more information. In the hedge fund world, we will call that feeling conviction.
Yeah, yeah.
How much do we believe, which basically, what is it? How much do we believe our analysis?
Yeah.
So that's what matters. And I could, if I had my slide set in front of you, I literally can give you 100 quotes from science in the last 20 years saying how emotion is the clue to being rational. Emotion is the clue to good decisions. Emotions are required for complete analysis. It goes on and on and on and on and on. And it really is just this logical fallacy that emotions are conflated with behavior. Like if you feel something, you have to do it. No, you don't. You get this energy that kind of urges you to do something, usually. And that's they really mean control the urge.
Yeah.
Don't act impulsively. And what we now know is that there's enormous amount of information in our senses, feelings, and emotions, which are only degrees of intensity of the same physical experience. You get knowledge out of your body, a sense, a feeling, an emotion, some information in a sense, a feeling, and emotion. The trick is to learn to see that as a data set and to actually analyze it in an organized way, which can be done once you understand how that system's really working. So it's just, I mean, the original guy whose science I discovered in 2003 was Antonio Damasio, who wrote a book called Descartes' Error. And it was Descartes, the philosopher, said, "I think, therefore I am."
Yeah.
Damasio wrote this book to said, no, it's "I feel, therefore I am." And in the interim 20 years, I mean, the amount of research that's gone into emotion, judgment, decision-making, like there were 50 papers in 2000, 5,000 papers in 2005, 5,000 papers in 2010. I recently found a chart that showed the increased dollar amount that's gone to the study of emotion in the past 20 years. I mean, it's jaw-dropping. We literally just didn't know. We just didn't know. We just misunderstand our own mechanism of perception and judgment.
Yeah. No, that's great. And
since you asked.
yeah, of course. And then how does one go about understanding one's emotion or recognizing emotions? You know, it needs to be like, I presume, a vocabulary. You need to have some kind of awareness of what to look for, or, you know, how do you go about instructing people?
Well, again, I'm going to say first is be willing. There is research that shows that vocabulary makes a huge difference. Okay. And so, like, I start out workshops, and I'm going to do one for Real Vision next week, where I literally have people write down every word they can think of for a feeling or emotion of trading and investing. See how many there are. Because the research shows that the more words you have for these physical experiences, the more you can get the information out of them, and the more you're likely to not act impulsively.
Okay, yeah.
So I always summarize this into the question of what am I feeling and why? It's an easy question to ask. It's an, you know, you basically know what I mean when I say what am I feeling and why.
Yeah.
Answering it accurately, though, is like a whole other skill set. And the value of answering it accurately is almost indescribable, both in a general perception and judgment, but particularly in a market perception and judgment. So you have to undertake the process of learning how to build your dictionary on yourself that helps you accurately answer what am I feeling and why. So, like, I'll start with people with all these words, and then I'll kind of boil it down to the words related to conviction or confidence. And I help people build like spectrums so that they have a tool that they can kind of figure out on a daily, a daily, or last week I had a client who literally sent me his fundamental process. And for each data point in his fundamental process, he had ranked his level of belief according to this culled list of feelings around confidence. Okay. Because what you end up being able to do is pull out your true intuition, you know, your actual expertise, because expertise starts to exist as a feeling. You know, it starts out as this linear conscious thing, and the better you get at something, the more it goes into your body. The more you know what you're feeling and why, you get to start to pull out your true pattern recognition based on all your years in the market, and separate that from whatever the self-image reputation is, or expectation is. Repetition was the word I really meant. Self-image repetition. So you start to know, you know what? My sense of these 4 things that are going to happen with oil in the next 4 months, like, I'm really convicted. I mean, I'm convicted in 3 of them. 1 I'm not so sure about. I could maybe get more information. Okay, you got that. You got that feeling. Then you also have the feeling of, you know, but I do have to get an A, and I do need to be right. And that's some sort of anxiety, right? Well, you start to be able to untangle that so that you can just tolerate the anxiety of, being pressured to get an A, and believe the intuition that's your expertise, and kind of which feeling is which. It's like learning a new sport, I admit. It's like picking up a golf club or putting on a set of skis the first time. It's not, you're not going to do it just right. And it's going to take effort, mental and physical effort. But it works. It works. People are able to separate their integral versus their incidental. So there's a woman at Harvard, Jennifer Lerner, who's done a lot of research in risk and emotion, and she categorizes all of our emotions as integral, meaning they matter to the situation, or incidental, meaning they don't. I think in investing, you can summarize that as informational or irrelevant, intuition, true pattern recognition, or impulse. And people can do it. And here's the really amazing thing about it. Because you're starting to work with your own human perception and judgment, like more the way it actually works, it actually starts to get easier. You're not fighting yourself.
Okay, yeah.
As much. You're not having to say, follow my process, follow my process. Don't listen to the fact that there's a little voice telling me, because this is what always happens, right? Follow the process, follow the process. Don't listen to that little voice. 6 months later, I knew it. I should have listened to the voice. But there was no point in your process that you could listen to the voice, because you're not allowed to. But if you start doing this from the much more accurate understanding now of perception, judgment, and decision making, you can put a part in your process for the voice, and then you can undertake skill development to analyze the voice. And you're not going to get it right 100% of the time, but you're going to get it right more of the time than you did before you were doing that.
And so is there certain, from a practical perspective then, I mean, are there certain ways people can bring this into their process or their routines? I mean, is it you journal at the end of each day? Is it when you feel imbalanced in some way, at that point you start to write down, what you think your feeling is and kind of what it's linked to, and separating the impulse from the intuition? I mean, how do you sort of guide people around this?
Yeah, putting feelings into words, whether it's you, in a computer screen, or you in a piece of paper, or you in another person, is this the feeling? Why is that the feeling? No, it's really kind of this feeling. Okay, where did that come from? Well, it's really kind of this feeling based on that. Untangling the spaghetti bowl of that subjective experience via language. In an ideal world, probably with someone who knows how to talk to you about it. But since there aren't even enough people in the world to provide that service to everybody, you can do it somewhat for yourself through journaling or through just writing. Or if you're really lucky, if you have a person who gets it that you can actually talk to. What I mean is gets the value of you sorting through what you really feel. Because most of us in this world of cognition is superior, and you shouldn't be anxious or worried or not confident or whatever, it's hard to find people who can listen to someone talk through their concern or worry or doubt without judging the concern, worry, or doubt, without trying to emphasize the analytical piece of it. And what happens is when someone can, whether you do it for yourself typing, and there is research, by the way, that even with athletes, and if they make a mistake, that they process the mistake and recover from it more quickly if they write about it, which is a little bit ironic also in a positive thinking world, because it's supposed to be shake it off, be confident, be positive, blah, 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 blah. Everybody knows that stuff, and everybody knows that it only sort of doesn't work, but then they don't want to tell anybody it doesn't work, because then they feel more like something's wrong with me. I digress, as usual. Words, you were right. Words. That's actually called emotion differentiation and emotion granularity. So differentiation is like knowing the difference between fear, frustration, and disappointment, let's say. And granularity is knowing, okay, how many different kinds of fear are there? How many different kinds of frustration are there? How many different kinds of disappointment? Just fear and frustration are a lot easier than disappointment. Disappointment's hard to get super granular with. But I mean, fear, you can be mildly concerned, or you can be terrified. Frustrated, you could be, annoyed or enraged. right? Like it's granular. So there's research that shows that the more granular a portfolio manager is with their negative emotions, the more money they make in well-analyzed situations. They did the work, but they can be granular, and they have an expectation, they have some conviction. They could be granular about why they're worried about it. The person who's able to do that is going to be able to execute better on their analysis than the person who doesn't.
And how important is your body in all of this?
It's huge, because literally in a research institution, this is called visceral intelligence. Visceral is referring to your viscera, your body. The information is there. I was talking to some quants, very mathematical, a few weeks ago. And, we're definitely talking about their educated ability to choose, a model or an algorithm. And I'm like, look, let's suppose I had some new complicated problem and I explained the problem to you, knowing that you're going to apply math to the problem in a way that I, Denise Shull, couldn't do, but knowing you are an expert, what's the first thing that you're going to do? You're going to think to yourself, such and such, whatever, drawn from calculus is the way to think about this. And how are you going to feel? And they're like, I said, you're going to have a sense of what the right math is to apply. And they're like, well, yeah, of course. I'm like, you're going to have a sense, a bodily reaction as to the appropriate math to apply to whatever this problem is. That's like an intuition. That's a bodily piece of information. And even though you're a math guy, and even though you're a total quant guy, and you think you don't use that stuff at all, presented with a new problem, you have a physical bodily sense of what's the right thing to do. That's expertise. And that's where it exists, in your body.
And are there certain parts of your body that, those emotions show up first? Is it like your stomach, would you say, or, your shoulders or something? Or does it just vary too much between people?
There probably is some research around that, but I don't know it. And I think it's kind of more individualized.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to say something tangential. There's actual research that shows the more you can detect your own heart rate, just like sitting here, can you feel your heartbeat? That's called interoception, meaning you can perceive your internals. And it's the basis of sense, feeling, and emotion. It's like awareness of your body. So while I don't necessarily think, I hold tension right here, but a lot of us hold tension right there. That's what, we get shoulder massages. But I don't think we really know for sure. But I wanted to mention the heart rate thing because I think the converse is true. You can practice just trying to hear your heart rate, and so then you can start to practice knowing a little bit more of what you're sensing and feeling. And again, then you're willing, you're dropping some of the defenses, and you start to learn to trust yourself. You start to find out that little voice is often right.
Yeah. One thing I found, I'm not sure if there's any research or you found this as well, is when I think about my breathing, my breath kind of reveals a lot about how I'm feeling. So in my case, I might hold my breath when I'm tense. And then as soon as I become aware of that, I know, okay, I'm holding something. And so I need to look into what that is. And my breathing pattern, if my out breath is very shallow versus my in breath, or things like that, which I guess are related to the heart rate. But I find breathing, the breathing side is something I use, at least personally. It's been a useful indicator of my sort of feelings.
Yeah, I'll say it again, like anybody can think about any realm. And when they first learn to do that thing that now they're somewhat of an expert in, I don't care if it's research or math or skiing or golf or whatever. Like you first learned it like step by step, you were introduced to it. It made some sense. You amalgamated it in your head. And then you became really knowledgeable in it. And at which point you didn't do it consciously, linearly. you did it out of a sense.
Yeah.
And we can all be better at whatever our craft is by learning how to navigate and interpret those senses better than we were taught, particularly given that we were taught to ignore them.
Yeah.
And there's still enormous amounts of information in finance and behavioral finance, like your intuition is useless. It's crazy.
And I mean, one thing that does sort of stand out is at least the cultural image of successful traders or hedge fund managers seem to be these. It's hard to imagine them being very self-aware. They seem to be these kind of very macho type sort of people. I mean, that's the cultural representation of them. Now, obviously, you've worked with lots of very successful traders, and I mean, do you find that they are that self-aware and they have that willingness to look inside of themselves?
Well, first of all, people who call me by definition have some level of willingness, right? Or they would call.
Yeah. Okay.
So
yeah,
I do have a,
there's a selection
select.
bias,
So my data set is skewed. But there's a couple of things. Real brain research shows that those who are best at predicting markets are predicting other people, and they're using more people prediction and social skills.
Okay, yeah.
So, because why? All that matters is what everyone else is going to think down the road. And if whatever factors you analyze is to get to that answer. So some of people who are really talented in markets have that innately. People prediction. If you think about studying economics, it's largely about how are the groups going to react, and then and certain people were either born with more, it's called theory of mind, born with more theory of mind or use more theory of mind. And then they also might be fairly good at knowing when they're confident or not confident, knowing, despite what people tell them, trusting their intuition. They might not be completely self-aware as to the moments that they get afraid of future regret and double down on a position and, blow a month's worth of work. And they could get better by knowing that level but they might come to the job with greater theory of mind and natural sort of conviction, intuition, trust, and skill, if you will. And so they might lack the complete level of, to use the Olympic athlete I work with, she uses the term mental awareness. They might not have the complete mental awareness, but there isn't anyone that I could not listen to if they describe their market process, and they may be describing their market process as completely devoid of emotion and be completely process driven. And I'd be able to go there, 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 and there. There was something discretionary, something that you basically made a decision on some sort of confidence spectrum. Or we'll use the word instincts. Somehow instincts are okay, but intuition is bad. Come on. But having said that, everybody's got their pattern, right? I'm sorry, everybody gets too big, too quick, too small, too fast, in too early, out. Everybody in the market's got some version of that. I don't care how successful you've been. You want to solve that? Get to know what you're really feeling and why. Because there's a unconscious emotional driver for why you get too big, too quick, or in too early, or out too early, or whatever it is, or why you double down at the worst possible moments, or why you give up on a position right before it works. There's a past emotional narrative that you experienced that you are unconsciously applying to your perception judgment in the market. And those things, if someone's willing, can be found and can be untangled. Maybe not solved 100% sometimes, but untangled such that you're not controlled by this thing you don't understand that seems like you just have to control the emotion. You just have to control yourself and follow the process. Right.
Okay, yeah. So I hear you there. So people may come to you, they might sort of say, look, I can't handle losses, or I'm getting to position too early, too late, or whatever the reason is they come. Ultimately, the path for them to improve is to have this recognition of how the unconscious, their past, how that's affecting their emotions and their perception, and hence their judgment and their actions thereafter.
I think that's the biggest lever.
Yeah.
I think someone can start to be more organized about intuition and like more okay with using intuition and kind of recognizing it and ranking it, and get better about recognizing and ranking conviction. You know, what that's really like, what do I really think and how much do I believe it? Before they get into their unconscious. Like, in doing those two pieces will help.
Yeah.
Because they're honoring that piece of the judgment decision. But if they really want to be the best they can be, or they really want to solve a pattern that they see, like, let's go deeper into, I mean, fear of missing out kind of everybody has, but it's really future regret if you really unpack it. And then what's that regret about and where's it coming from? And then that's where you start to get into what does it mean to me personally.
Yeah. And, you know, you've obviously been doing this for a number of years now. You know, how have you changed your approach over that period of time? You know,
I've refined it.
Okay.
I mean, a couple of things have happened. I've had way more science to build on.
Yeah.
So I literally didn't have this, you know, we're always predicting, and we're particularly predicting a future emotion. It's called anticipatory affect. And the guy that's done the most work is Brian Knudsen at Stanford. But like, now I can say to somebody with, you know, like sunrises in the east kind of certainty, there's a future emotion being predicted in this situation. Let's figure out what it is. Now, I knew that from the psychoanalyst, but I couldn't be quite as declarative about it as I can be now. So I can, like, I used to think of it completely as a, well, maybe not completely, but largely as a psychoanalyst would think of it. Now I can do the whole job, but almost without even bringing the psychoanalyst into it. Because the science says we're always predicting based on past experience. The science says that, like the cutting edge of neuroscience says that. So that's all I have to say. I don't have to bring Freud, or more importantly, the modern psychoanalyst, which is actually my angle on it. Okay.
And you know, I know you've consulted on the show Billions, and you know, you kind of associated with that. But for me, the interesting thing about that idea is that the hedge fund has a coach or therapist within the hedge fund sort of setup. So leaving the specifics of that aside, if you were to sort of set up a hedge fund and you were, you know, you wanted to create the right culture, you know, to manifest, you know, what we've been talking about, I mean, how would you set the fund up? I mean, what types of things would you try to do to make sure that it will be the right environment for this?
The first thing I would do is make people's physical health an absolute priority. Meaning, this Aura ring, I don't know if you've heard of Aura ring.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, the Aura ring helps measure your sleep.
Yeah, literally, no one will ever do this. But the hedge fund that has a really nice nap room that allows people to take a nap without any cultural, you know, pushback will make more money, period. Sleep deprived skews our judgment. When we are sleep deprived, we misperceive risk. So not being sleep deprived means we would more accurately perceive risk. And what would be the result of a whole hedge fund more accurately perceiving risk? Not overemphasizing it and not under it. They would make more money.
Yeah.
But people put nap rooms in. I worked in a hedge fund for 3 years that had a nap room. It became a storage room. It was full of boxes. But you can't actually go in there and take a nap. Can it be okay? So that would be my first, because you decide on conviction. It's a physical experience. You need to know what it is. That physical experience is informed by your literal physical experience, by your actual bodily energy. So let's optimize the bodily energy. your perception and judgment will be better. It's as simple as that. Now, I mean, I, of course, would do all of the things that I do in terms of building conviction spectrums and getting people to, you know, pitch their stocks or pitch their ideas or pitch their, you know, position expansion or contraction vis-a-vis the lens of conviction. You know, I would be a global macro momentum kind of person if I had my own hedge fund, because that's more of my background. But I would just get the whole psychological capital right. And actually, if we go back to my book, speaking of my process not being terribly different, because sometimes I'll pick up my book and go, wow, I said that 12 years ago. But in there, I have a hedge fund. And in there, the hedge fund prioritizes psychological capital. That's what I would do. I mean, obviously, I get people who know what they're doing. And, you know, you got to know how to hit the ball. You got to know the basics of playing the game.
Yeah.
Some people sometimes will mistake what I say for saying, you can just do what I say and make money in the market. I'm never saying that. I'm saying you have the basic idea of how, you know, you have some way to play the game, whether it's fundamental or technical or global macro or whatever, but it's a joint, your results are a joint probability of the accuracy of your lens for the market and your ability to execute it. There's a ton of things we can do to get closer to optimizing our ability to execute on our expertise that we don't do, or most people don't do.
Yeah. Yep, that all makes a lot of sense. I don't think I've ever worked in a place that has a nap room. I did work at one place that did have a kind of meditation room, and so people would use that to meditate or pray or whatever. But then I went there once to have a look at what was happening there, and I noticed there were 2-3 people sleeping on the floor. They were using it as a nap room, interestingly enough.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. But absolutely, you know, what you say about sleep, I think is very, very true. And
I didn't, you know, some of that research again is Jennifer Lerner out of Harvard, which last I knew she was consulting the Navy. She'd taken like a leave of absence. And she's done some insane work showing how like sleep deprived skews your risk perception. You literally don't see it. So, you know those times where you look back and you go, how did I miss that? What was I thinking? I used to ask my clients if they showed up with a, my God, yesterday I like totally blew it. I don't know what I was thinking. I'll be like, you know, how much sleep did you get? Then half the time they'd say, well, the new baby was awake and my wife was sick. And, you know, like, sure enough, you know, not to allude to complexity of my job to sleep, but
it's an important factor.
It's an important factor.
Yeah.
You know, it's the athlete, you know, the football player has his expertise, and then he has how much energy does he have to play the game? Like, we don't question it in athletics. We don't question sleep and diet, you know, in athletics, because we know the expertise is delivered through the body. We misunderstand how much of our market expertise is delivered through the body.
Yeah. And, you know, speaking to you, a few kind of almost non-market related questions have come to my mind. You know, one is, what do you make of midlife crises that people often have, well, men in particular in finance, that, you know, is there such a thing, or is it kind of
there's definitely such a thing.
And why does it happen? You often see it, and it's I'm not sure if it's more prevalent in finance or not, but you know, you see a lot of it.
I was talking to a new client on Monday. Person's 52, kids are grown, they've made a ton of money, and they're sort of like, I don't care about money. Like, I like the game. Yeah. I like the intellectual, you know, pursuit of the answer, but I don't actually care about the money. Like, so what should I do now? Like, and we figured out they were okay caring about the money while they had kids to raise and put through college. Like, you know, okay, I want to give my kids a nice life, right? So I'm going to go make this money. Now that that's all done, they're like, I got enough money, I don't really care. So that one you'll have to get back to me, because I will just see what happens with that person. I probably haven't. I have a stunning number of clients who are men between like 38 and 45 with 3 children.
Okay.
Like the next time, I just got a new client a few weeks ago who was in that category, 40, and wife was pregnant with the 4th. And I was like, wow, somebody has 4 kids. So my point is, most of my clients are sort of pre-midlife crisis.
Okay.
So I don't know how much more intelligence I can have.
Yeah. And then the other one is, we just had the Oscars recently, and there was something happened during the Oscars. Will Smith heard a joke from Chris Rock and went on stage and, struck Chris Rock. I mean, what do you make of that? Will Smith is Mr., down to earth, super composed. And he did that. What?
I haven't thought about it that much, to be honest. At first I was like, was it real?
Yeah.
So I guess I think it was real, but I got to tell you, my intuition still isn't sure it was real, despite the subsequent apology and I don't know.
I've seen lots of videos. I've seen lots of videos where experts have slowed the video down, and apparently it's like an actor's type of slap, where there's like it looks like a slap, they may not be a slap or something, so.
Well, they are actors.
Yeah.
But let's suppose it were real.
Yeah.
It's bizarre because, first of all, these comedians say, insulting, offensive jokes all the time.
Yeah.
Now, a man for his wife, maybe. It really becomes about him, which is a problem, not about her. And if it was real, first of all, it's just not acceptable. But I think it's like a reflection of our culture where you're allowed to act out anger now with, impunity more. And then as a woman, you get into the whole, well, how about she defend herself? But so I don't really know what I think, other than I'm not even sure it's real still.
Yeah.
That's my intuition. If it were gun to my head, bet I'd have to go with not real, because I have learned to trust that voice.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll find out, at some point it'll come out. And when they're probably going to co-present the Oscars next year together as best friends or something. Okay, now, I did want to ask a few sort of personal questions. One was, what's the best investment advice you've ever received?
I saw that on the list. Oh no. I buy low, sell high. I literally don't know. The truth is,
Okay, interesting. And then, more importantly, do you have a kind of a system or some kind of productivity approach to kind of keep on top of everything? Because obviously, there's a lot of academic literature that's coming out in your area. I mean, you're managing lots of clients. I mean, you're managing a business as well. I mean, how do you do it all?
I'm not particularly into astrology, but I am a Virgo, and I'm by nature very organized.
Okay.
And so a to-do list that works. And for us, it has now finally, after years and years and years and years and years, become Microsoft Teams. They have a tasks thing.
Yeah.
And I am finally happy with my to-do list in tasks, in Teams, even though it's Microsoft and it's clunky. The other thing, is put things on the calendar. So I'll know that as the business owner, I got to deal with the taxes or the insurance or the fact that there was some weird $800 charge on my credit card that those are the kind of things that can disrupt you, and you waste a bunch of time, and you get distracted and you don't get the most important stuff done. Because that's the flip side. What's everything you have to get done and what are the most important things? And so put most of your energy into the most important things. But there are real things like taxes and bringing insurance and all that stuff you have to take care of. Put it on the calendar. Next week I'm going to spend 90 minutes with my assistant, and we're going to go over every one of these tedious paperwork, financial, business running things. And then you do it. Then you don't worry about it when something comes across your desk. And then you do focus on it. put it on a calendar. I mean, I even put remember to call.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, like in a 15-minute thing on my calendar. And then I do actually remember to call because I put the phone number right there. And so comprehensive to-do lists that work for you. And there's 1,000 kinds, right? You know, Monday.com. I mean, there's a million of them. My clients are always talking to me about them. But for us now, tasks by team by Microsoft and putting things on the calendar.
That sounds good.
And priorities.
Priorities, yeah, absolutely. And then books. Are there certain books that have really influenced you? Or perhaps books recently that you think have been very good?
Well, I'll tell you a great one. It didn't so much influence me, but I sort of knew, but it crystallized. It's called 7.5 Lessons About the Brain by Lisa Feldman Barrett. It's short, and it basically tells you what I told you. You're always predicting everything. The Drama of the Gifted Child, which is a long, complicated, dense, intense, overwhelming book, written, I think, in the 1980s.
Yeah.
But it really does, if you can wade your way through it, and I've had plenty of clients who've waded their way through it, it does help you see how, like, you had this experience as a child, and it caused you to think certain ways about yourself. And maybe they're true or not true. Chances are they're not true, right? Like that things happened that caused you to think certain things that maybe are irrelevant.
Yeah, no, great recommendations there. And then finally, you know, if people wanted to follow you, you know, get in touch with you, see you, what's the best way to do this for them to do that?
So my consulting company is called the ReThink Group. The ReThink Group. It's really rethink thinking. That whole metacognition you said. It's rethinkgroup.net.
Okay, I'll make sure to include a link on the show notes as well.
Yeah. I'm on Twitter as Denise, my middle initial K, Shull. I've got interviews on Real Vision and various other places. And I think that's basically it. Through the website. The best way, if someone wants to actually contact us, like send a note through the website, because it turns out it's the only way we manage. Yeah. And then your name goes into that tasks on Teams. And we don't forget about you.
Yeah, we've seen. You've described how the sausage is made, so that's good to know.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that was a really eye-opening and such a great experience speaking to you. And I feel as though we could speak for much longer. But I'm cognizant that I have to respect your time. But at least from my side, it's fantastic speaking to you.
Thank you so much for having me. Fun to speak to you too.
Great.